Everybody, this is Saad for the Saad Truth. I finally have had some time to put together a analysis of trophy hunting. Uh, so hopefully this will contribute to the ongoing debate in terms of whether trophy hunting is a viable conservation strategy or not. The way that I'll go about tackling the issue is as follows. I will first discuss some of the utilitarian costs and benefits of trophy hunting. So we often hear that there are substantial economic and social benefits that are reaped to local communities when trophy hunting is implemented as a program. And so I'll look at some of the supposed benefits. Then I'll look at some conservation and evolutionary issues. So for example, from a population dynamics perspective, does trophy hunting result in an increase in population size of a given species? Do certain phenotypic traits change, for example, horn size, as a result of trophy hunting? And then I will look very briefly at the moral dimension. And of course, this third component, the moral dimension, is an element that could be discussed separate from the first two. In other words, even if the first two points yield clear benefits to trophy hunting, and as you'll see, they don't, one can still object on moral grounds. And so in a sense, these could be independent of one another, but I'll try to cover all three. But first, some introductory remarks. So I'm hardly a Che Guevara tree hugger. I have utilized the evolutionary-based hunter-gatherer hypothesis in my own scientific work and have written about the signaling inherent to hunting. See, for example, my 2007 academic book, The Evolutionary Basis of Consumption. Excuse me. Hence, I'm well aware that hunting is an inherent element of our evolutionary history. Accordingly, it is quite extraordinary when angry pro-trophy hunting types write to me to urge that I educate myself about the matter. Subsequent to my having shared my moral outrage at several infamous instances of trophy hunting, including the Cecil case, on my social portals, I started receiving irate and at times insulting comments from individuals regarding the supposed endless benefits of trophy hunting. As any clear-thinking person would do, I decided to conduct a detailed analysis of the issue by perusing through the established literature. I wanted to gauge whether the scientific community was indeed unequivocal in its position regarding the conservation and other possible benefits of trophy hunting. This exercise, as I said, is separate from the moral dimension, which I'll address last. So I begin with the supposed utilitarian benefits, namely the economic and social benefits. So here we go. So this is a report by the International Union for Conservation of Nature. In other words, this is an international union, very respectable organization, whose function is to pursue optimal conservation strategies. So certainly, if trophy hunting were a strategy that would yield huge conservation benefits, then they certainly would support it. The original report was written in French, and I've provided you with the link to it. It was translated and summarized by Dr. Peter Catt. Interesting that his name is Catt, an evolutionary biologist who obtained his PhD in ecology and evolution from the Johns Hopkins University. I mentioned this not to argue from authority, but to point to the fact that this is certainly somebody who is well versed in the issues of conservation. As a matter of fact, Dr. Catt was invited by the Botswana government to help in the conservation of lions. He is a co-founder of Lion Aid and has published numerous scientific papers. So this is not somebody who's appeared on the Joe Rogan podcast who represents trophy hunters. I say this not to be facetious, but to point to the fact that in the same way that we wouldn't look to cigarette manufacturer lawyers to tell us about the benefits or the health benefits of smoking, we should perhaps look to impartial folks, not to somebody who is very much vested within trophy hunting. Now, in my case, I don't care in the sense that I don't have a vested interest. Yes, I am morally repulsed by the practice, but if scientifically, economically, socially, it were shown to me that trophy hunting is beneficial, then I would report it as such. Now, Dr. Catt translated the French report, which is unbelievably exhaustive. And I've provided you with a link to the translation for your perusal. So everything here you can check for yourselves. And so rather than trying to summarize it, I'm simply going to read the particular passages that I found useful. So on the issue of whether there are social and economic benefits of trophy hunting, let me read, this is verbatim, I'm reading the quotes. So where management levels are similar, wildlife is much better conserved in protected areas than in hunting areas. Okay, that doesn't look too good for trophy hunting. Hunting areas are much less resistant to outside pressures, poaching for example, than protected areas. By the way, these are studies that were done across many countries in Africa where trophy hunting is out. So this is a profoundly exhaustive study. Economic returns from trophy hunting are minimal, and the land use returns are much lower than what could be gained by raising livestock, for example. This is definitely not looking good for trophy hunting. Hunting contributions to GDP and national budgets are insignificant, especially in light of the large areas of land set aside for hunting. Returns for local populations, even when administered by community-based natural resource management projects, are insignificant and is no incentive for communities to stop poaching and agricultural encroachment. Let's go on. The number of people employed, estimated at 15,000, is minuscule compared to the 150 million people living in 8 main trophy hunting nations, and setting aside 16.5% of the land area for trophy hunting is a questionable decision given that trophy hunting does not provide any significant level of socioeconomic return. Good governance is largely absent from the trophy hunting industry, and those in charge are not ready to share any level of control. Lack of transparency does not serve the state, local communities, or conservation. Hunting had and still can have a role in conservation. So you see, yes, it is possible for conservation to be benefited via trophy hunting if considerable changes can be made. And this if is almost impossible to achieve, incidentally. So currently it contributes very little economically, has no social role, and makes no contribution to good governance. Consequently, trophy hunting has an overall negative effect as far as development is concerned. Continuing, environment has to be seen as a global good, not for the exclusive use of private interests or minorities. Let's go on. So here are some key figures from the same translated report, right? This is all very, very clear data. So in sub-Saharan Africa, some 1.4 million square kilometers are set aside as hunting areas, 22% more than all the region's protected areas. Annually, about 18,500 tourist hunters come to Africa, and there are about 1,300 hunting companies offering services. Try to coordinate 1,300 hunting companies and make sure that they don't cheat. In the 11 countries where trophy hunting takes place, hunting areas take up 110 million hectares, about 14.9% of the total land area. Tourist hunters take about 105,000 animals per year, including 640 elephants, 3,800 buffaloes, 600 lions, and 800 leopards. Oh boy, I'm feeling the conservation. Hunting income is estimated at about $200 million, half of which accrues to South Africa and half to the other countries. Now, here's a good one. On average, trophy hunting generates $1.1 per hectare per year, compared with at least $2 per hectare for protected areas, so half as well as protected areas. Community income is about 10 cents per hectare per year of their land set aside for hunting, and indicates why communities show little interest in preserving hunting areas and stopping poaching. Let's go on. The weak socioeconomic benefits of trophy hunting and the minimal contribution to conservation argue against setting aside such large areas of land. In Kenya, where the population has increased by a factor of 2.7 since hunting was banned, 14 million in 1977 and 38 million in 2008, the nation developed in the meantime a tourism sector 40 times more profitable than hunting, centered on a land area of 8% protected area. So again, look at the number of data and facts that I'm throwing at you here. The contribution of trophy hunting to GDP percentage and the percentage of land area set aside for hunting for various countries is as follows. South Africa, 0.04% of GDP, 13.1% of the land. I won't read the rest of them, but basically the idea is that a very, very large area of land is set aside for a profoundly minuscule impact on GDP. So on average, in the 11 countries that were studied, 14.9% of the land area has been set aside for hunting, and the average contribution of hunting to GDP is 0.06%. This means that they are the least economically productive lands in the country. Trophy hunting does therefore not represent economically valuable land use, especially in the context of the need to abate poverty and hunger. It has been argued that hunting blocks are centered on land that supposedly has no other economic use. This is overstated, and the closing of hunting as currently practiced would give far greater returns. It is precisely in those countries where alternative uses are available that one encounters the greatest difficulty in persuading rural populations to maintain hunting areas. So now step for a second and think about all that I've read. Does this look like there is unequivocal proof that trophy hunting is the panacea of conservation? I couldn't think of worse data. Let's go on. Since the socioeconomic and development contributions of trophy hunting are practically zero, their greatest potential contribution should be seen as conservation. That value can only be augmented by conscientious integration of hunting into overall conservation strategies. So here they're being honest. They're saying there are conditions where trophy hunting might have some conservation benefits, and I stress here might, but we have to be very, very careful, and it varies across species and across contexts. In total, 7 countries listed here have set aside close to 700,000 square kilometers for trophy hunting for an employment of nearly 10,000 people. It should be noted that for many, the employment does not exceed the 6-month hunting seasons. Photographic tourism creates 39 times as much employment on a permanent basis than trophy hunting. That itself is devastating data. Such tourism in the Lungwa National Park in Zambia alone has created work for about 800 employees, double the number of all employed by trophy hunting in Benin and Burkina Faso combined. In Zambia, returns from hunting in 2006 to the local population were about $1 million to use 22% of Zambia's land. In Zimbabwe, each household received between $1 to $3 per year from this practice. And you could read on. So for example, in Benin, you basically get $0.23, so 23 cents per person for trophy hunting revenues and so on. So again, this is not exactly very convincing in terms of the economic returns of trophy hunting to local communities. Given such weak returns, there is little incentive to stop poaching in hunting areas, as the informal bush meat market is much more valuable to the communities. In Ghana, the bush meat trade is estimated to be worth $250 million, and in Ivory Coast, $148 million. It is noteworthy that the annual bush meat trade in Ghana alone exceeds income from trophy hunting in all of Africa. Sadly, for conservation, such economic returns of poaching indicate that this activity will continue as there is no competing alternative. I'm almost done with the report. So compared to other forms of tourism, trophy hunting composes only 1% in South Africa and 3% in Tanzania. Such numbers are expected to decrease, and so on and so forth. Bottom line, it is difficult to imagine data that are any less supportive of the supposed utilitarian benefits of trophy hunting. So from an economic and social perspective, this unbelievably rigorous scientific study across a wide range of countries in Africa concludes that it is devastatingly useless, the practice of trophy hunting. All right, so let's move on now to conservation issues. So the first issue to address is, how do we know scientifically whether a given wildlife management strategy how is it going to impact the population size of a given species? And the answer is that particular process is incredibly complicated. So there are mathematical models that try to predict the net results of a given wildlife management intervention strategy. And of course, the net results are never guaranteed. These are just models that try to estimate what happens in a given condition. And so for those of you who are interested, I've provided you here one example of how complicated the modeling of population dynamics can be. So just click on the chapter in question, and if you can get through some of the math, you could see that the typical arguments that you see in a podcast about, oh, it's clear that trophy hunting increases the population size of a species is utter nonsense. It is incredibly complicated to try to predict what the downstream effects are of a wildlife management intervention strategy. I'm not suggesting that it's not at times beneficial to have trophy hunting, but to simply argue that the data is unequivocally clear is false. It's not true. So let's look at conservation benefits in terms of population size when it comes to trophy hunting of lions. And again, rather than try to summarize it for you, I'll simply quote directly. And I'm specifically using the strategy of quoting because therefore nobody could say, oh, but you editorialized, you misinterpreted, right? I'm quoting the exact words of the scientists in question. So this is from a paper titled The Trophy Hunting of African Lions, published in PLOS ONE, a very serious scientific journal. And so here we go. Here's a quote from page 1 of their article. Now these are scientists that are in the business of studying conservation and trophy hunting. So trophy hunting has contributed to population declines outside and in some protected areas in Tanzania, a country that holds between 30 to 50% of Africa's lions. Excessive offtakes from trophy hunting also lowered population density of lions and altered sex ratios of lion in all of these different places. Now look at the next sentence to show you that we're trying to be fair and unbiased here. Conversely, trophy hunting can create incentives for the conservation of lions and the retention of land under wildlife-based land uses. Trophy hunting can also theoretically increase local tolerance of lions and thus reduce persecution resulting from the threat that the species poses to livestock and human life. So they are recognizing that there are conditions where trophy hunting could be beneficial, but they're also recognizing there are myriad of cases where trophy hunting has resulted with nothing but a devastation of the population in question. Let's go on to another paper published in Conservation Biology, and the title of the paper is Effects of Trophy Hunting on Lion and Leopard Populations. Let me just read you two quotes. Lion harvests declined significantly in 4 of the 7 hunting areas across the country. And then the other quote, across the rest of the country, the proportional decline in leopard harvest was significantly higher in areas with the highest initial harvest, and trophy hunting was the only important variables. In other words, what results in the reduction of the population of lions and leopards in many of these areas is precisely trophy hunting. So this goes to the heart of the idea that trophy hunting is a panacea to resolve, right? If you want to save the lions, we just have to kill a bunch of them. Okay, so these are scientific studies conducted across many different areas where they actually tabulated what was the net effect on the population size, and the results are not too good. Let's go on. So what's the scientific consensus? So here I tried to look for a paper that is a very recent one. So this is a 2015 paper, and look at the title of the paper, The Assessment of the Role of Trophy Hunting in Wildlife Conservation, published in a journal called Animal Conservation, right? So, I mean, it couldn't be more apropos for what we're studying. And now let's look at a few of their quotes. Scientists have debated the role of trophy hunting in wildlife conservation for decades. Now, what does that quote imply? Is that it's hardly unequivocal what the effects of trophy hunting are. There are conditions where it works. There are endless conditions where it has had devastating effects. That's why scientists are debating this issue. So those who wrote me all angry and huffy because they saw a podcast where some hunter said it works, no, that's not quite what the consensus of the scientific community is. Let's go on. The undesirable effects of trophy hunting may partly explain why it is difficult to reach a consensus on its role in wildlife conservation. So they're recognizing that there are many undesirable effects, and that's why it's difficult to come to a final consensus. But if I were to venture based on what I've read in the literature, it certainly does not seem to suggest that trophy hunting is the great benefit that many people make it out to be. So while trophy hunting may be useful to wildlife conservation, it is thus not a guarantee. So again, let's be humble about this. Let's be tentative before we make pronouncements that, hey, trophy hunting is the way to go. Come on, Saad, get smart, you moron. Why don't you get educated about the topic? Well, it seems like I've pretty much gotten educated. But anyways, let's go on. Moving on from population size, let's talk about what are some of the negative evolutionary consequences beyond evolutionary size, beyond population size. So for example, do certain phenotypic traits worsen as a function of selective trophy hunting? So to see how complicated it is to answer such a question, see the variables included in the model developed by Mr. Rood and Bischoff. And I've included for you here the reference to that paper. And again, for those of you who write to me to say, oh no, but it's absolutely clear that it's all benefits, it's wonderful, trophy hunting is the way to go, well, try to get through the mathematics of this paper, and then you could come back to me and tell me that it is unequivocal that trophy hunting is wonderful. And here's another paper published in Nature, undoubtedly one of the top 2 science journals in the world, Science being the other one. They looked at the effect of trophy hunting on body weight, horn size, and reproductive success of a particular animal. I can't remember the exact species. And of course, they found all sorts of negative consequences of trophy hunting. So again, I don't mean to imply, incidentally, that there are no benefits of trophy hunting, but the idea that the consensus has been reached and that the debate has been closed is simply false. It's a lie. It's untrue. Let's go on. Now, I've given you economic data. I've given you social data. I've given you population dynamics data, evolutionary consequences data regarding trophy hunting, and certainly it doesn't seem to suggest that trophy hunting is wonderful. If anything, it suggests that in many cases it's quite bad. But I'm going to propose here another argument as to why trophy hunting could never work. So in addition to the difficulty of monitoring trophy hunting programs along with the rampant corruption inherent to the practice, I argue that the tragedy of the commons is an inextricable psychological trap guaranteed to lead to quota violations, over-harvesting, and the eventual decline, if not extinction, of species. Some of you may have seen one of my earlier Sad Truth clips where I talked about the tragedy of the commons. Basically, let's look at it from the farmer's perspective. So if we've got a plot of land where a bunch of farmers are letting their livestock graze the land, they may realize that at some point that they need to give this land a break, and they decide that everybody is going to stop using that land for their livestock. And so they agree that for the next 2 years, gentlemen's agreement, we will all stop using this land. Now the tragedy of the commons comes about when each farmer decides, you know, if I cheat on the contract and I let my livestock graze on the land, hopefully the other farmers will all be honorable. They won't violate the agreement. And that's the best of all worlds, right? I still get my animals to graze on the land. It doesn't really cause a problem to the land. The land can still recover. And then hopefully in 2 years, the land will be perfectly recovered and everybody will be happy. Now, of course, the tragedy of the commons is that each of the farmers thinks this way. They all violate their agreement, and hence we have that tragedy. Well, this is exactly what's bound to happen with trophy hunting, right? It doesn't matter how many quotas you set. It doesn't matter how many monitoring systems you set. It is a perfect environment for the tragedy of the commons to kick in, right? It doesn't matter if I cheat on the quotas. Nobody is going to know the difference, and hopefully all other trophy hunters will be honorable and kind. Of course, all trophy hunters think the same way, and then we end up with the extinction of a species. In other words, this psychological trap is something that is likely going to drive the market within the trophy hunting industry. Now that we've covered all of these different utilitarian and evolutionary arguments, we come to the moral question. And frankly, my original posting on this issue on my social portals was based on my moral disdain for the practice, right? I wasn't very familiar with all of these other things that I've talked to you about. I've educated myself about these things precisely because people said, you know what? We challenge you. We think that trophy hunting is wonderful. And why don't you educate yourself, Professor Saad? Well, guess what? I did educate myself, and that led to the presentation that I am offering you here. But going back to the moral argument, even if everything I had said so far had come out in favor of trophy hunting, there is still the moral issue of whether it is appropriate to commodify the life of a sentient being, right? To incentivize an animal's life solely makes sense when we assume that our animal cousins are not within our moral circle, to use the term and framework of Peter Singer. If morally speaking, this is construed as repugnant and unacceptable, then all other inputs into the debate become immaterial. In other words, if you feel that morally a sentient being, an animal cousin of ours, an animal that can feel, that can think, that can live out its life in dignity, is deserving to be treated as something other than a commodity to be bartered in a cold cost-benefit calculus, well, then this whole exercise is irrelevant. Then you think that morally we should not be doing this. And let me propose to you a thought experiment. So suppose that a few specimens were left of a given species. Assume that the license to kill them off would bring enough revenue to help save 3 other species. So we'll kill off this one species and we'll get $100 million for it, and that will allow us to save 3 other species. Would this be a reasonable calculus to entertain? Well, the answer depends on whether these calculations are viewed as morally acceptable or not, right? Some people might say, it is grotesque to argue that we're going to now barter in some calculus, some morbid calculus, whether saving 3 species is better than having one go extinct, right? For some people, no, this is not something that we could debate. It is grotesque and repugnant. So again, my point in putting together this clip is not to say that trophy hunting is evil under all circumstances, that trophy hunting can never result in benefits, but it was meant to rise to the challenge that several of you made to basically offer a unbiased perspective of trophy hunting. And I hope that I've convinced you that far from being unequivocal in favor of trophy hunting, the economic, social, and certainly scientific benefits don't point to trophy hunting being a panacea. So there you go, folks. That's my take on the trophy hunting debate. If you're going to weigh in, please do so, but do so in a respectable and polite manner. Talk to you soon. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already, and support the channel through Patreon. Cheers.